Welcome to Construction Cashflow. I'm your host, Stu Davidson, and if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
If you deal with people with respect and honesty and clarity, then there's absolutely no reason when you need to stop you from reminding them from time to time what your or their rights and obligations are under that contract. Somebody's taking a corporate stance. I think that's always important that we recognise that you don't take things personally. You can argue till you're blue in the face with somebody and that meeting's over and you have the crack in the car park about football or whatever afterwards, and I think that's really important, and that's one of the things I like about the industry, the people. So the whole idea of, we'll leave the contract in the drawer and we'll get it out if we need to. No, it should be on your desk. It should be dirty dog-eared contract that's flicked through every day, because when you pull it out the drawer, it's often too late and you can never go backwards. And that collaborative party that you thought was your friend can turn on you very quickly, and if you've not been doing your bits, you've nowhere to go. Deal with it. Now, dealing with it might be negotiating a better position, but don't pretend it doesn't exist, because it will come back and bite you on the arse at some point. And I think that's one of the key problems in this industry, that people bury their heads in the sand, hope that it'll never happen, whatever it is. It does happen, and then they're in a blind panic. Again, it comes back to rights and obligations. Understand what they are, but understand them from the outset. Don't get excited and blinded by the prospect of a nice shiny £100,000 order, let's say. You might get paid £100,000, it might cost you 150 because you've actually signed up to X, Y, and Z, or you're on the hook for, delay damages, contra charges, stuff that's outside of your control, but you've signed up to it because you didn't read the contract in the first instance. Standard form contracts, and I do a lot of work with NEC, they're drafted the way they're drafted for good reason. They're not intended to be heavily amended, and it just creates chaos. Better communication, either orally or through the documents, will avoid a lot of the disputes. It's not cost plus, it's defined cost plus fee. The cost incurred may be defined cost, but it might be included in the fee, or it might be disallowed cost. I know most of the areas where contractors will tuck away money there, or perhaps I should say drop things out and reallocate them. The concept of collaboration is framed by the contractual relationship. You look at some of the profits that some of the big organisations are posting, which are eye-watering, and yet at the other end, there's a supply chain that's going out of business at a rate of knots. People through the supply chain, it's not to say that they don't bring some of it on themselves.
In this show, we ask our guests to tell us their story, tell us a little bit about their background, how they got to where they are today, how they develop their product, their services, their ideas, and we discuss how that can affect construction cash flow and other areas of construction, and also to give us an idea of how we might make things better and give you a few tips and ideas to take away with you. And listen to the end, where you'll find out more about them, more about our guests, about what motivates them, what inspires them, and hopefully that'll inspire you too. And always, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. In this episode, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Rob Hubbard. Rob has over 30 years experience in the industry, specifically in civil engineering and major infrastructure projects. Rob has experience across many forms of contract and many forms of procurement. He has worked on client side, contractors and subcontractors side. He also is an expert on public sector procurement and working with local councils. Rob has a master's degree in construction law and dispute resolution. He's a member of the RICS and a fellow of the Chartered Institution of Civil Engineers and Surveyors. Rob is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and a fellow of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. He's an associate member of the Institute of Civil Engineers. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Rob Hubbard. Hi Rob, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks Stu. Thanks for inviting me on to join you today.
You're most welcome. So Rob, tell us your story. Tell us of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Okay, so when I was at school, all I wanted to do was work in a bank. I was obsessed with banking. Went and did my work experience, etc. Went to college and did business studies. Got a job in a bank. Started work with Barclays, where I grew up in Leicester, and absolutely hated it. It bored me silly. I think it was around about the time of where things were moving to more of a sales environment, sort of late 80s, and I just wanted to get out, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So evenings and weekends I used to work for my then girlfriend's dad as a labourer. He'd got his own scaffolding business, and he said to me, right, go and get this paper called Jacker's Journal. And I thought, what the hell is that? So having asked what the hell it was, I went and got a copy of Construction News, and had a look in the back pages. Thought, well, this will be interesting. Yeah, I quite like construction. I liked being on site. Phoned up my old careers teacher from school, who I'd not spoken to for many years. But cut a long story short, I ended up answering or seeing an advertisement for a contractor for Balfour Beatty Civil Engineering, who just been awarded a contract in Kettering in Northamptonshire. Kettering Southern Bypass, which is now part of the A14. Rocked up to that, and somewhat naively, when the receptionist asked me what I did, I just blindly said, I either want to be a civil engineer or a quantity surveyor. So she said, oh, okay, go and sit over there. So I sat in a chair, and some guy walked over to me and said, right, okay, I understand you're looking for a job. Come on, let's go and have a chat. Took me to this table that had got, a beautiful array of snacks and drinks laid out, and great icebreaker. He said, what do you fancy? I'm having a beer. Do you want one too? So he won me over straight away there, and sat down. Guy called Colin Williams, who was commercial manager at the time, and he said to me, look, he said, you don't want to be an engineer, you want to be a QS like me. And that's where it began. That was in 1990. He offered me a job. I accepted, started my career with Balfour Beatty Civil Engineering. Subsequently ended up working for different parts of Balfour's on two separate occasions later on in my career. But then I spent 27 years working for contractors predominantly, tier ones, tier twos, specialist subcontractors, a little bit of freelancing during that time. And then about 5 years ago, I felt like I needed a change, wanted to experience what it was like on the client side. So I secured a position in a private practice, George Corduroy & Co. And I held the position of regional director for the north of England, but managed the offices in Leeds and Manchester. Yeah, really enjoyable. But last year sometime, I started feeling that I was a little bit disengaged from the career that I've grown up in and enjoyed and developed, and wanted to get back to the more of the doing, thinking about what I enjoy doing and why I enjoy doing it. So my original intention was to resign my position, take stock, and join another firm that was a bit smaller, that was perhaps a little bit more hands-on opportunity. But very quickly, literally in the space of a few days, decided that probably the best thing to do was to go it alone and build up from the ground upwards on my own. And that's what I did. And that's where my business was born.
You were influenced by a scaffolding firm.
Yeah,
I always find scaffolders are pretty pivotal, aren't they, in the construction process? And they don't get a lot of airing, but it's always something around moving the scaffold or the scaffolding. And if you understand the lifts and different aspects of scaffolding, you're halfway there, aren't you?
Yeah. I always struggled when you got nice shiny boards, because the new ones were always a lot wetter and therefore heavier. And
exactly.
And I always got sent into the middle as well. So I was reaching right down and having to pump it all the way up. Yeah, you learn quickly on site, don't you, when you're on the tools?
You do. I remember my first day. You mentioned in your first day. My first day, it was on when they were constructing the M20, and I got a job as a chain boy, and I was really thrilled. I was 15 or 16, when the guy, I jumped in, a bit like your guy, that you had all the cakes on the table, and he says, well, I'm going to have a beer, do you want one? And then when I got into they said, we're going to go in the Land Rover out to where you need to run your tape across, and it was tape measures. Run and dodge out the way of the caterpillars coming up and down and the machinery, in them days. And I had to wind the tape in so it didn't get run over quickly. But we went in the Land Rover, and we were going up all these nooks and crannies, and he turned around to me and said, here, do you want to have a drive? And I was thrilled. It was great fun. I was hooked. And then how I ever got in the queue for quantity surveying, I'm not quite sure, but that's kind of what happened, So, no, great story. What do you think, Rob, has changed, if anything, in the industry since you started, and where you kind of got to where you are now in terms of wanting to drive something forward on your own?
Obviously, the big things, the digitization of most processes and practices, and that ongoing drive to digitize things, which is great. I'm a great believer in setting up processes and procedures to streamline what we do. But I think that the detriment of that is a lot of the knowledge seems to be lost or forgotten, and a lot of the role of the quantity surveyor now is very transactional. A computer says yes, or more often the computer says no, and people struggle to articulate the reasons why, or even challenge the outputs that they're getting. And you're going to get a given output from an electronic process based on the quality of the input. If that doesn't make sense, you're not going to get a lot of sense coming out the other way. And it's having that knowledge, that basic knowledge. I think you spoke on one of your earlier podcasts about being able to understand construction so you can do an effective takeoff.
Yeah.
You know, I've spent a bit of time looking at digital measurement, and in theory it's absolutely fantastic and it cuts down the time amazingly. But if the design isn't structured in a way to enable the takeoff, it's just a pretty drawing, albeit in 3D. And people struggle often to understand and accept those aspects. Like, oh, we've got a 3D BIM model and it'll do everything. Yeah, but it looks nice. It doesn't do everything because it's not constructed in the right way to facilitate the other operations. Measurement, does it work for clash detection and things like that? Is it fully inclusive? In most cases, unfortunately not. So I think, the role of the QS has become very transactional, and it can be challenging. But that every challenge creates loads of opportunities.
I believe it does, and I think more now than ever, particularly where there's more people challenging cash flow and contracts and trying to make things more collaborative within the industry. It's an art and a science, isn't it? So you've got to be able to negotiate, you've got to be able to understand people, and it's like taking those measurements and understanding how to package those, for procurement, design, and negotiating those packages. So there's so much more that goes with it than just a 3D model, and I don't think people actually really understand the nuts and bolts of that.
You mentioned a key word there, which is often misunderstood and misused, and that's collaboration. And collaboration often morphs into capitulation, where one side abuses their role in the collaborative relationship. And I've always been a great believer, but that the concept of collaboration is framed by the contractual relationship. You're absolutely right. If you deal with people with respect and honesty and clarity, then there's absolutely no reason when you need to stop you from reminding them from time to time what your or their rights and obligations are under that contract. The whole idea of, we'll leave the contract in the drawer and we'll get it out if we need to. No, it should be on your desk. It should be dirty dog-eared contract that's flicked through every day that people understand.
Absolutely.
Because when you pull it out the drawer, it's often too late and you can never go backwards. And that collaborative party that you thought was your friend can turn on you very quickly. And if you've not been doing your bits, you've nowhere to go.
The parties don't always understand their roles under each clause of the contract. You don't see very often at pre-meetings where the parties go through each clause and say, right, this is how we're going to behave against each of these clauses. This is the what, why, who, or where on what does it mean, for us in our relationship going forward, and how are we going to communicate with each other on these which are the key clauses that we're going to be, we're going to be looking at on this project. And it's when we don't understand that, and like you say, if we put the contract in the drawer, then it leads to disputes, doesn't it? It doesn't. It leads to, like you say, it's we start out thinking we know what collaboration is, but then suddenly we don't really actually understand what that is.
No, and you should be collaborating within, the constraints of that agreement that generally the controlling minds of the respective organisations have signed up to, and do it openly and honestly and with integrity. There's always a workaround, and sometimes you need to be a little bit uncomfortable, but you need to accept that. You can't always have it your own way. If somebody's signed up to something that's not that favourable to them, you deal with it. Now, dealing with it might be, negotiating a better position, but don't pretend it doesn't exist, because it will come back and bite you on the arse at some point. And I think that's one of the key problems in this industry, that people bury their heads in the sand, hope that it'll never happen, whatever it is. It does happen, and then they're in a blind panic, usually after they've sat on it for a few more months, hoping it'll go away again. But you got to meet these things head on and deal with them.
There's still adversarial attitude generally in the industry, or do you think it's improving?
I'd like to say it's improving. Some areas it is, but in all honesty, I think it's pretty cutthroat out there. Survival of the fittest. There's some very large organisations which may also be termed as almost predatory. You look at some of the profits that some of the big organisations are posting, which are eye-watering, and yet at the other end, there's a supply chain that's going out of business at a rate of knots. All too often, contracting's a race to the bottom, which is completely wrong. Whilst I'm an advocate of people through the supply chain, it's not to say that they don't bring some of it on themselves. Some of the terms and conditions that contractors sign up to, are absolutely ridiculous. Again, comes back to rights and obligations. Understand what they are, but understand them from the outset. Don't get excited and blinded by the prospect of a nice shiny £100,000 order. Let's say you might get paid £100,000, it might cost you 150 because you've actually signed up to X, Y, and Z, or you're on the hook for delay damages, contra charges, stuff that's outside of your control, but you've signed up to it because you didn't read the contract in the first instance, or get somebody who does understand these things to read it on your behalf and make some recommendations. I like to be able to make a difference. I've always been a great believer that the role of the quantity surveyor is there to add more value than the cost burden that it attracts. I've developed a method to define the services that my clients require, because they don't always know where that value can be added. So you need to talk to people. So I call it the Lira method. It's pretty simple, but it seems to work. L's for listening, to understand the client's needs, objectives, and outcomes. What do they think the problems are? Where are they getting the pinch points? We then move on to the investigation, reviewing documents, personal interviews, understand how and why situations arise. And then we'll make some recommendations, which generally come out of the findings from the investigation stage, and make sure those recommendations are aligned to the client's objectives and what their needs are, and where they want to take the solution that we may have identified or mitigate. And then we take the action. So once those proposals have been agreed, we'll put them into place and deliver those outcomes. So I think it's listening to clients and getting to know clients. It's surprising how often you get talking to somebody and they think they've got a problem, and that can manifest itself into a whole load of others, or even identify things that they didn't know were an issue. But everything adds benefit and value. I focus clients and do a lot of work for local authorities, highway authorities all over the country, over England and Wales. Public sector is short staffed, generally underfunded, can often be seen as an open door by some of the larger contracting organisations. A lot of the public servants are easy targets for a bit of commercial bullying. The work I do for local authorities is protecting the public purse. It's getting better value for your money, for my money, for everybody's money. We all pay taxes. We all complain about the potholes out there or street lights not working. I try and help them drive value through those highways contracts. And then further down the supply chain, I try and help out smaller contractors who perhaps don't have their own full-time QS, or owner-operators don't really have time or the knowledge to review contracts and subcontracts.
How the payment generally with public sector organisations, they always used to be notoriously long, but do you think they're looking to speed that up at all in the way that they procure work these days?
To be honest, Stu, that's another one of the reasons why I like working for local authorities, because they're good payers. I generally get paid well within terms. I don't know many contractors who don't. I suppose it depends on circumstances really, but I do like working in the public sector, and so you know that your money's relatively secure as well. They're not going to go bump overnight, which is always a risk in this industry. Always a risk.
Where do you see the biggest risks in the industry at the moment for supply chains? Because there's an awful lot of suppliers, particularly small suppliers, that are going out of business. Where do you see their biggest risk? Is it their side? They're not reading the contract, they're not understanding contracts, or they're not issuing applications on time, or they're not managing their resources? Or is it more the other way? I mean, not so much public sector contracts, unfair contract terms, amended contracts, that kind of thing. I mean, some public sector organisations do amend contract extensively. What are you finding? Are they leaning towards a particular? Do they have a particular set of amendments that they use? Does it make it fairer, more collaborative, or do you think they do pass risk down the line?
To be honest, I find it quite variable. It depends on who's been doing the drafting. Often local authorities will employ a legal firm to draft amendments to their contracts, which usually puts a specific slant on the contracts, and they're very heavily amended, very complicated, often contradictory, because there's no sort of real practical commercial application of those contracts. Then the standard form contracts, and I do a lot of work with NEC, they're drafted the way they're drafted for good reason. They're not intended to be heavily amended, and it just creates chaos. I think that one of the biggest risks of the industry is the skill shortage. I can see some of the effects of that now. People aren't coming into the professions, the disciplines, and learning all of the skills and knowledge. And because there's a shortage all the way through the levels, I think people are getting promoted far too early and holding more senior positions than they've got the experience to match with, often chasing salaries. That will manifest itself in more and more dispute. But yeah, getting young people interested in careers in surveying and engineering. Firms need to get into the junior schools rather than just the high schools and colleges. Make construction exciting. I was absolutely buzzing when I joined the industry. I just thought it was brilliant. And if you can tap into people with something, get them inspired. I'm taking an apprentice on this summer, which I'm quite excited about. Scary, but it's something I want to do. That guy took me under his wing and gave me a chance and inspired me, and I've been doing it for 30 years since. And I would like to be able to inspire other people in the same way.
Through your experience and what you've done and the stories that you could tell a youngster coming into the industry, I'm sure you'll make it. The apprentice will have a great time, particularly the work that you're working on. You know, public sector work can be so varied, can't it?
Yeah,
so much fun to get involved in.
We do. We have a good mixed bag of work, and it is really interesting. And I do like the fact that no 2 days are the same. And, it's evolving and changing all of the time.
Coming back to what you were saying about amended contracts, and I know that some councils, they'll go to a legal firm to amend a contract. Sometimes I wish they'd come to a QS first, you know, because they add, like you mentioned, you know, we could add a practical side of how you amend a contract if you need to amend a contract. And sometimes I think when the lawyers do it, it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So when you hand a brickie a contract that's 300 pages long, requires 9 warranties, you know, they're going to go, you know what, I'll go and do the job down the road because this is too complicated for me. At the same time, you know, I think this is where your expertise comes in as well. It could be that you could support the supply chain when it's going out to tender. If something's been heavily amended, it looks complicated, to actually sit alongside those contractors and then go through and explain what it's about and support them, and actually whether it's a good fit for them as well. I think that's a key thing that they might not realise.
That's it, and sometimes, you know, the right thing to do is to walk away. So first point, it's back to that whole concept of it being transactional. Somebody somewhere has said, this is our standard form of subcontract, and that'll get sent out as an inquiry. But if the supply chain pushes back in a calm, considered, polite but robust manner, then that must drive change, because people will have to listen. And it's not always a case of digging down till you get somebody who'll do the job. Contractors want quality subcontractors, and the subcontractors need to stand up and say, look, this is me, you want me. Again, going back to one of your earlier podcasts, specialists in their particular area. The main contractor wants them to deliver the work because of quality and price. Need to manage that risk portfolio. Sometimes it's appropriate for subbies to take on board the risk. A lot of the time it isn't. But the payment terms don't necessarily have to be favourable to the subcontractor. They always need to be fair. How the hell can you expect a subcontractor to take risks for something that they've got absolutely no control over, or even a chance of reason before seeing, like the performance of others on a project right through to its completion, which might be 12 months down the line, when they're just dropping in to do a week's work? It's absolutely ridiculous. But it comes back to transactional way of doing business, where people aren't sitting down and thinking, right, okay, we need this bricklayer. He's going to do this piece of work. What's the best way of getting into a relationship with him? It needs to be fit for purpose. One size fits all doesn't really work in contracting.
And I've always found it's to bring the trades or contractors in as early as possible to talk to them about the project, in advance, to see what their appetite is for it, and sometimes iron out any interface design issues. And so they and also it gives them the opportunity to gear up their resources. They know they've got a possible project coming up. Maybe there's some quite complex brickwork involved. Then the brickwork firm knows that he's got to see if his best bricklayers are available at that particular time, so that they can produce the quality, so they've got the right amount of skills to match. But quite often we'll go out to tender to the subcontractor, could be years after the design's done and everybody else has been on site, we've done the foundations, and he gets 2 weeks to put his tender together. Then he's expected to resource it, and then it's like, oh, I don't really fancy that detail there, we never done one like that before. And then all of a sudden you're in a delay. You're back and forward with the design team, aren't you?
Pipeline visibility and early involvement can never be underestimated, in my opinion. Again, it's back to effective communication, isn't it? Talk to people. It's a good point you raise it. Find out what the appetite of the market is, because people like to see a pipeline. If they think the opportunities are out there, they're the best jobs that'll get priced, aren't they? And there should be more than enough to go around. And if people understand jobs, they understand the scope, they understand the requirements, the quality, etc., and they can plan, then we'll start to cut out some of these knock-on effects, some of these delays, which often then spiral out of control. Better communication, either orally or through the documents, will avoid a lot of the disputes.
Anyone listening from a local authority perspective to the podcast, when would be the best time for a local authority to contact you? And what are the key things problems that you can solve, or that you've seen you've been solving for a local authority?
Ideally, like most things, before you get into contract with an entity, but unfortunately that opportunity is rarely available, so there's no ideal time really. So the glib answer would be before it's too late, and often people don't realise when something's on the horizon until it hits them. So what often works well for people is to come in and do a bit of a health check, get invited in by a local authority, generally sort of head of service, head of highways, someone like that. And they'll say, right, okay, we've got this framework contract, or we've got this, specific project contract, and can you just do us a bit of a health check on the behaviours of the parties? And that's irrelevant really whether or not the project management role is being undertaken in-house or it's through an external consultant. And just look at, compliance with the contract's obligations, look at how the payment process is working out, how the change control process is working out, and what the tone of the correspondence is and the behaviours. Defined cost Audits is always a good one on NEC. I've not failed to save money on one of those. Yeah, often misunderstood and mismanaged by both sides, which generally results in the employer paying more than they should do. And the earlier the better for those. Specifically, and narrow it down a little bit, but specifically talking about an NEC option C target cost contract. There's a common misconception that it's cost plus. Contractors will exploit that. They'll fire all of their costs into it, and on the basis, and the justification is generally, well, we've incurred the costs of our supply chain, therefore it's a cost, therefore you're paying, and plus our fee. Whereas the reality of it is it's not cost plus, it's defined cost plus fee. And depending on how the contract's structured, whether it's amended or not, the cost incurred may be defined cost, but it might be included in the fee, or it might be disallowed cost. I know most of the areas where contractors will tuck away money there, or perhaps I should say forget to drop things out and reallocate them. I don't want to be accused of picking on contractors. Yeah, and again, it's about doing things the right way and increasing value for those local authority clients, which then releases that money to be spent doing more work, which betters everybody in the community.
The schedule of cost components is also one that I think is misunderstood a lot. People tend to revert back to a traditional pro rata prelims instead of going with a schedule of cost components, which is misunderstood. So if anyone listening want to understand what they're signing up for an NEC contract, then I think it'd be good if they spoke to someone like yourself, because it can be very costly if you get it wrong, can't it? Particularly on the NEC.
It can, and just picking up on that, in a point we talked about earlier about lawyers drafting contracts, it's not uncommon for lawyers not to understand the mechanics of NEC contracts either, to the point where I've recently been, I've undertaken a couple of presentations to legal firms explaining to their lawyers how it works in reality and what the practical applications are. Please get in touch and let's have a chat.
How could anyone listening, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you, Rob?
The best way is either to send me an email, which is enquiries@cantidad.co.uk, or to fill in the contact form on our website, which is www.cantidad.co.uk.
So I always put a link from the podcast into the Construction Cashflow website. So what I'll do is I'll put the link to where they can contact you, so they can listen to the podcast retrospectively. They can come back to the podcast to contact you direct. Rob, are you ready for a quick fire round?
Yeah, go for it.
Motivation and inspiration. Okay, so let's go. First question then, Rob. How do you start your day?
So I start my day. I'm just coming out of hibernation to a certain extent, but we'll stick with the winter, Rob. I get up, I make myself and my wife a cup of coffee, drink that, and then I take the dog out for a walk for half an hour, have a bit of quiet contemplation, listen to the radio, talk to the dog, sometimes listen to your podcasts, and think about the day ahead. And then I'll come back and have half an hour breakfast with the family before I start work. I generally start work about 8 o'clock most days.
When are you most productive?
Definitely in the mornings. Yeah, I'm more of a morning person than a late night person.
What's something new happening in your life right now?
Work-wise, I'm partway through my training to become a registered mediator. Mediation is getting quite close to becoming a mandated form of ADR, and I'm quite interested and excited about the mediation scene. Personally, I'm a frustrated student of the Spanish language. I do a little bit every day, but it's hard work. I take my hat off to anybody who can speak more than one language, especially non-English speakers who can speak English as well as they can. or multiple languages. I find it really difficult, but interesting at the same time.
What does adventure look like to you?
A new pub with some beers that I've not tried before most of the time. I'm a bit of a real ale freak. I like drinking different beers, but it's funny actually. My wife and I have started planning world around cruise. We're looking at sort of doing one of these 100-day cruises. So I would definitely classify that as an adventure.
What thing would you love to do that might surprise your friends and family?
That's an interesting one. It might not come as a great surprise actually, but it links back to one of the things I'm learning. I'd like to go and live in Spain for a while, specifically Mallorca. Fell in love with the island many years ago, and I absolutely love it. All aspects of it, not just the beach resorts. I've been there lots of times on holidays, and just I love going wandering off around the little towns and villages, and I would love to have the opportunity to immerse myself in the culture for a good few weeks or months and come back a fluent Spanish speaker.
Yeah, that's the best way to learn a language, isn't it? Is to actually live in the country, so they say, and listen to music, apparently.
Yes.
In that language. Name a challenge you overcame that changed your life.
I've had some real good highs and some pretty low lows as well, professionally. But I think the most recent one was back in August, September, when I resigned my position from the firm I was at, which was a very secure position, but I didn't feel I was happy, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I needed to pull up my big boy pants and back myself, and I did, and it's been very successful. I've got a lot of secured work booked in right up until the end of my financial year, which is this September 23, and the prospects going forward are very, very good. I didn't anticipate it picking up as much as it did, but like I say, I backed myself and went for it.
What inspires you and motivates you?
People who deliver what they say they're going to deliver. I like people who grab hold of something and go for it. Not necessarily in a gung-ho way, but they spot the vision and they work at it, but maintain the personality. They're good people, but they're focused, organised. There's a guy that I think of in particular who started off buying cheap houses, and he then set up an estate agents, and then he started buying more estate agents, and now he helps other people systemize their businesses, because that's how he's built up his own success, by having systems and processes in place. And he's a big inspiration to me in the way that I look to manage and operate my business.
What does success look like for you?
Probably different now than it did a few years ago. Probably 20 years ago I'd have said, yeah, big house, Porsche, blah blah blah. To be comfortable and content with my lot, to know that I've got a viable business, I'm helping people grow and develop their own careers, I'm providing value to my clients and a good service, I'm providing for my family. That's and my football team's winning. That's success to me.
What is your team?
My team's Leicester City. I've had some highs and lows over the years.
And highs and lows. I get that. So finally, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say to my younger self to work harder at getting professionally qualified, then develop that and have a plan of what you wanted to do and where you wanted to go, and gain some different experiences. I suppose not necessarily regret, but often I'd wanted to go and work overseas and experience what that might be like. And I've missed some big booms, sort of Hong Kong and the Middle East. There's two of them, but I didn't get professionally qualified until probably my 40s, by which time I'd got the bits and pieces. I didn't feel it appropriate to start dragging the family away, didn't want to go on my own. And just, set yourself up and be recognised by your peers as early as you can, because then, that demonstrates to clients then that you are capable of doing what you say you can do.
Rob Hubbard, it's been an absolute pleasure, and some real nuggets in there. Pleasure interviewing you. Thank you so much, and I hope to have you on the podcast again sometime.
Thank you, Stu. It's been really enjoyable chatting to you today, and I'd love to come back if you were to invite me.
Absolutely. Cheers, Rob.
Thanks, Stu.
You've been listening to Construction Cashflow. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so you never miss an episode. And remember, the faster cash flows, the faster wealth grows. If you enjoy this episode and you love the show, please do give us your review.